It's 2018, a year plus into the Trump presidency. As the days progress, it seems that the country is going through change. Xenophobia is somehow on the rise. A phobia spread by our politicians, various news outlets, and social media. The main message being pushed is that criminals are crossing our borders, and our country's economy and security are at stake. What's their answer? Purge the illegal immigrants, build a wall, and militarize the border. I ask myself, is this America? In seeking an answer to this question, I first get led to the Catholic Charities in San Antonio, Texas. What's your title?
My name is Evelyn Huron, and I'm the Director of Legal Services for Catholic Charities here in San Antonio.
All right, and I noticed you have a refugee and immigration services.
Yes.
What kind of services does that provide?
Well, the agency has is part of the refugee resettlement program. That's a government program, and so Catholic Charities assists with refugee resettlement. They provide housing, education, employment assistance to refugees who have been admitted into the United States under the Refugee Resettlement Program. One of the aspects is to provide legal services to the refugees, and so we adjust their legal status to become permanent residents once they've become refugees and been accepted as refugees. We assist with their adjustment, and later on we can adjust with citizenship applications.
Okay. And with that adjustment, what does that entail?
Well, the resettlement program does provide them with the opportunity to basically assimilate into American life. And so it is trying to help them avail themselves of benefits, education for their children, getting them enrolled in school, getting them proper health care, helping them find employment, seeking out employers that are willing to hire refugees, how the current administration and the climate might affect either their current process, or maybe they can avail themselves of the process. What we've also been asked for is to provide more seminars in the community. We've been called by various churches and local community organizations to go out and speak to basically inform people what does this mean for us? What does this mean for our community? What are some of the rights that we have or we don't have if the government is going to be very active in this area? And so we've seen an increase. We've got close to 6 outreach events in the next 2 months, because every day in the news there's something about raids and yes, detention and DACA and what about these students or dreamers that are being detained. And so all these questions and fears are coming up, and so we've seen an increase in traffic with people wanting to know information, and that certainly has increased really since January.
Oh, yeah. Well, with all these raids, I mean, we're hearing they're getting really aggressive with these raids. I mean, are all these stories true, or, I mean, is it at the level they're, I guess, reporting at, or is it just...
Well, some of it is true. You know, we've heard in Austin that ICE, which is the Immigration Custom Enforcement, is short for ICE, has gone to construction sites and done raids at construction sites, that they've shown up at Walmarts and shown up in various places to conduct raids or find people that are undocumented, that now people are being arrested or detained now. Unfortunately, the president hasn't changed any laws. All we know is the executive order dealing with the travel ban of individuals from certain countries and hold on the refugee resettlement program. That's completely separate than what we're seeing right now with these raids, because the laws have not changed. The problem is that the laws were selectively enforced. You had sanctuary cities. You had certain communities that were unwilling to call ICE if they were dealing with people that were undocumented in courts. If you got a speeding ticket, if you were at Walmart, or there was not enforcement of the existing laws.
Oh, okay.
Now, the climate is we're going to enforce the laws. Anyone who's here undocumented is violating the law, and we're not going to look the other way anymore. We're going to actively search you out, and we're going to actively inquire as to whether or not you are breaking the law by being here undocumented. So there hasn't really been a change in law. It's just now the atmosphere that, and the administration's position that they need to be, the law needs to be now actively enforced, and to use whatever means within the law to enforce it now.
Do you have any stories you can share, or is that like a legal thing?
About what?
Well, just any, I guess, a certain family, like a family or a person that you can remember that maybe like really hit you in the heart. Just
Well, you know what we have. There are various aspects to the immigration issue, and what we've seen, and the issue that we've been dealing with really for the last year and a half, are women and children that are seeking asylum in our country, because most of them are from Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. They're coming from countries where their lives are in danger. Not so much Mexico, but from Central America. And they come to the United States to seek safety. And the laws allow them to. And so once the government determines that they have a credible fear of danger, then they are paroled into the United States. But many of them are being detained. And that's where you're seeing the detention centers that are full of women and children, because they've come seeking asylum, but they're being detained. And the controversy is, well, they should be detained because they're not really here legally. They're here kind of on a provisional status until they prove that they're entitled to asylum. The other view is that they haven't done anything wrong. They need to be released. And one story in particular is it was a family of several children that their parents were murdered in Mexico because of past gangs that wanted to involve the family, where the family refused, and their parents were murdered, and the children had nothing to do. And so a relative in the United States said, go to the United States, go to the border, and tell the ICE agent, or tell the Border Patrol actually, tell them what happened. And that our parents have been murdered, we have no place to go. And immigration let them in and determined that they had a real fear. It was in the news, the murder of their parents. And so now you have 3 young children that have no place to go other than with their relative here. Now, of course, they're undocumented, but for humanitarian purposes, they were let in. They called Catholic Charities. We were able, with their relatives, to try to help with their immigration status. We were able to get them in school. And now these children are here thriving where they really had no life in Mexico. And that's what we try to do. We try to help people avail themselves of the legal process.
After speaking with Ms. Haran, she informed me of the classes that immigrants and refugees attend in order to assimilate into the American way of life. What's your name and title?
I'm Dorothy Ganther, and I am currently a teacher's aide. I have been a teacher. I've been the volunteer coordinator, many things for adult education with the Northside Adult Community Education Program.
My name is Thomas Harper, English instructor for adult education for Northside School District.
With your services you offer here, what's the main focus?
Certainly, the main focus of here of adult education is to progress to the person where they're a productive member of the United States community. that they become educated and find viable employment and education to be a contributing member of the United States.
How has the current administration's implementation on the immigration laws impacted your services?
Well, in some ways, it's restricted people's willingness to learn and to be more open to accepting and improving their educational system because their fear of possibly being found out, discovered, or even to the worst point of being deported from the United States.
Well, I think that it's becoming, education in particular is becoming more and more difficult to get grant money. Through the years, like I said, 18 years, I have seen the education grant money drop almost yearly from probably my first 9 or 10 years anyway. It's dropped every year for the amount of money to provide for teachers and other necessary things for to teach our students. Government funding really, I mean, they just cut all the time from education, and that is the most important aspect of our society is for people to be productive, and they must be educated.
What will you tell the people that are viewing this to help change your perception on the immigrants and refugees coming into America?
With respect to as far as adult education, I would prefer them to come see exactly what we do. See what is involved in adult education, to see how we as a group do our best to prepare and equip people to enter society here in the United States and to hopefully progress beyond what they think they're capable of.
And title of this organization?
My name is Arisa Rice, and I am a ESL instructor.
Well, one of the first questions I have to ask is what's your current opinion on the new administration's implementation of the immigration laws and how that has affected your ESL services?
In clean language?
Yes. Or no, if you want to curse a little bit.
No. You don't have any sense of humor. I've been teasing you since you got here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Frustration. Because if people only understood the precarious situation in which our students travel to get here, and they go through years of being vetted. Yesterday, one of my students, she received a medical card in the mail, like insurance. Mm-hmm. So she received it yesterday, and the deadline for using the card is March 13th, 2017. So when I was reading the letter, I called the number, and I said, excuse me, I said, there must be a mistake. My student just received this information, and the deadline is March 13th. She goes, no. Once they receive that card, there won't be any more health insurance. But no. So I was perplexed. It's like, okay, so this is what I told her. I said, go get your teeth done. Get everything done by March 13th. And I said, you've got to be, she said, no. After this, there's not any more. They will not be receiving their health care insurance.
Yeah, so it's just like, here, you get this one-time use of health care, use it now before it
Yes,
expires.
yes.
And that's it. No
That's
more
it.
coverage after that. Just
No.
a one-time. Oh, wow.
I said, oh, I just did not understand that concept. And, okay, so when you do that and you do that to a family, do you realize what you're doing? The undercurrents of all your actions. I don't think that some of the people in Washington, D.C. actually think through the policies and procedures.
No.
Before I was a teacher, I worked for the governor's office. So I was in politics for a long time. But teaching was something that ever since I was 7 years old, I always wanted to do. I used to sit my dolls in the garage and teach to them. So I was very serious. But, and it's also very painful to watch our families when they come in and they're trying to adapt to the American way of life. And what's very painful for myself and my colleagues is when we cannot use a vehicle to get through all those scenarios that are presented to them. And I was telling my students the other day, I said, you know, we think that when we get up in the morning and we turn on the lights, we don't even think about it. We have students coming over here who they don't even know what a microwave is, much less a dishwasher. It's unheard of. And one of the counselors from Catholic Charities told me a story about when she went to the airport, she picked up a family, and she took them to the apartment, and she said, okay, when they walked in, they just stood there. This was in the evening. Yeah. So turning on the lights, what is that? And it's so funny because the mommies, they have a difficult time in the kitchen until they get used to the stove, some of them. It's things that we just go in there and flick it on, and it's like...
It's just our normal conveniences that we have. It's just totally foreign idea.
Exactly. And a washing machine? Oh, my goodness.
I guess, what are their aspirations and dreams when they get here? I mean, do they say, like, I want to become a doctor, or I want to pursue this career field? I mean, do you have any type of stories?
Yes, exactly. But what stops them is the certification process. Because, for example, I have a master's degree, where their college level classes are different than ours in terms of credits.
Yes.
And that really, I said, wow. For an example, one of our students, she wants to go to medical school, but we have a retired doctor here that tutors, but the process in which she's going to have to attend will be almost like starting over. For an example, because the medical terminologies are different in their country than it is in ours, when our students are ready to do their clerkships, they'll have to take classes all over again in the medical field, like their biology, their anatomy. So but the really young ones, they don't let that deter them.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have, and one of the things I'm going to work on is that your teachers that come over here. To me, the school district, that's someone that they can hire. I can see that advantage in an exchanging of information, especially for the world history classes. That would be awesome.
They can help in reforming policies on both the educational side and immigration laws.
Tomorrow, Trump is supposed to announce his new immigration laws. And I'm wondering if immigration laws are made out of fear, okay, totally lack of understanding. And the 7 countries in which he named are the countries where our students come from.
Like majority, like
Iran, Iraq, all those different places. There's those students right behind you. You see? Mm-hmm.
Hearing and seeing what immigrants and refugees have to go through really opened my eyes. Even though I just skimmed the surface, I had to get more personal accounts.
Sure. The full name? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Haytham Abdul Razak, and I'm originally from Iraq. I have been living in the United States close to 12 years. I started my life here in the United States as part of exchange training program as a military officer working for the multinational forces under the supervision of the United States Army. And I was sent to finish my military training in 2005, and I continued to finish my training until 2007. And after that, I was not able to go back to Iraq due to the sectarian violence and instability. And I was forced to apply for asylum, and I was granted my asylum in 2009. In 2010, I went back to school. I finished my first degree, associate degree from San Antonio College. Then I finished my bachelor degree in applied arts and sciences in 2012 from Texas State University. And I was very intrigued and fascinated with the acculturation and integrations of refugees. So I studied sociology as a part of my master's degree program, and I focused on international students and immigrants in the United States. Then in 2014, I was privileged to be accepted in the PhD program of cultural literacy and languages, which is I'm preparing now to write my dissertation, hopefully finish in a couple months and graduate. And my profession at this moment is I am adjunct faculty at Northwest Vista College, teaching sociology, and also I'm a teaching assistant at UTSA and the College of Education and Human Development. And my research interest is mainly focusing on the integration of newcomers into the United States system, especially the school system. And my dissertation is about the family engagement of refugees in the American public school system.
Okay. With the current administration, with the current Trump administration, and the execution of the executive orders and the implementation of the implementation of the orders, how has that affected your I guess not journey, but your cause?
So let me be honest with you, and this is my personal opinion. Again, we cannot approach refugees with one single approach. Just like when you hear people talking about immigration issues, refugees are even more complicated because of the circumstances of departure and that cultural distances between the sending and receiving country. However, there is a concern, and the citizens of the United States have all the right to be concerned about their safety and the security of the country. However, I believe that exclusion is not the solution. It's about that concerted effort, starting from the government, starting from the school system and educational system, community members, and resettlement agencies, and how to put everything together and collaborate with the refugees themselves by giving them a voice, and also to discern what is working for us and what is work as a society and what is not working. Then we can make some recommendations, and then after that we decide what is the best for our country. However, if you go further with the point, I believe it's a matter of a debate between security and humanitarian effort or freedom. And I believe, just like we have, especially the government, the obligation to protect the citizens of the United States, I believe also we have a history of having obligations to help those who are in need. It's an ethical issue. And what makes us American is not our military strength, even though it's one of the main factors to that gain respect all over the world, but also is the American principles that is based on charity, humanitarian relief, and the practices of helping others and spread democracy all over the world. So I think we have to make a balance of addressing security concern, but also addressing the humanitarian concern, because even if we are concerned about some bad people or bad apples here or there, I think the solution is not about exclusion, because that will help the other party of implementing even more strategies to try to hurt democratic countries, including the United States. So the best way, I think, in my opinion, is making a balance between what we consider as approach to security, but also what we consider as approach to humanity. by showing an example, by defeating our enemy through the humanitarian practices, because it's very important, just as the military and security approaches are important.
I guess more of a historical question, just like, I guess, how was Iraq, I guess, invasion, or, just...
Pre-conflict.
Yeah, pre-conflict.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. Part of our effort to understand the circumstances of refugees is by understanding the historical background and the political system of the country of origin. Why it is important? Because that experience became part of the life of refugees. It shaped their perspective and attitude towards the same ethnic background or towards foreigners. So, for example, if we talk about the synopsis of the situation, of the political situation of Iraq prior to 2003, there's no surprise that Iraq was suffering for decades from dictatorship. And that form of government really affected the trust level of the people. And people were afraid to speak their mind, were afraid to voice their concern, and were afraid to even communicate with each other, because that might put them at risk of going to prison or maybe lose their life. So after 2003, and unfortunately Iraq was a field for sectarian violence and some different forms of insurgency. And that exacerbated the previous Iraqi experience of, with the dictatorship. So when they arrive here, we are expecting that people will be afraid to voice their concern or maybe to negotiate the process of integration, because they still believe that after all these years, that experience became part of who they are. So the culture of fear is present, and we have to be not only sensitive, but also to assure that this is a country of opportunities and freedom, and they are protected under the international law, and also they are protected under the principle of the American society, which calls for equal protection under the law, and also to be sensitive and not to discriminate against other people from different religious or ethnic or racial or linguistic backgrounds.
Speaking of, like, I guess, yeah, them coming to America, I guess, not saying you're speaking on behalf of everybody, but
Sure.
I guess what's the outlook or just the perception of, I guess, the majority of, like, Iraqis, Iranians on the American people themselves, not the government.
Right,
Just
right.
Just the normal, average people.
So I think it's safe to say that the majority, if not all, the refugees are really appreciating the opportunities offered to them and the hospitality of the American government and society. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes we have to understand that refugees also come with fear and trauma due to the tragic circumstances of their forced departure from their country of origin, or maybe the tragic circumstances of the refugee camps. So when they arrived here, really they need some types of counseling, whether in the school system or outside the school system, because we focus in the school system because you are dealing with children, and it's very important to have the good start with these children, because you are investing in the next American generations. And part of that investment is to also reach to their families and integrate them and put them in the same page and the same effort that resettlement agencies and other members of society try to reach, which is the same goal of integration and establishing that multi-ethnic society that we have in the United States.
My name is Andre Renteria. I'm originally from Chihuahua City, Mexico. I grew up on the U.S.-Mexico border in a town called Presidio, Texas. I received my Bachelor's of Fine Arts from Sul Ross State University and my Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Texas at San Antonio, where I currently teach drawing and painting.
On your story of like how did you come to the U.S. and how did you get to where you're at now as being a professor of arts?
Sure. Well, we moved to Presidio, Texas in 1994. I was 8 years old at the time, and my family. I grew up with with my mother's side of the family, and they're from the border. My grandmother was actually born in the U.S. in Van Horn, Texas, but she got married to my grandfather, who was from Durango, Mexico, and they decided to live on the Mexican side. My mother then was born in Mexico along with all of my aunts and uncles. I guess because of the law at the time, my mother was not able to get U.S. citizenship since my grandmother had lived outside the U.S. for more than 6 months, I think, was the law. So my mother was unable to get her citizenship. It wasn't until I was 8 that she was able to get the residency. Just this past year, I got my U.S. citizenship after living here 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I finished high school in Presidio and went to college in a nearby town called Alpine. I was originally a history major, or a Mexican-American studies major, and then changed to fine arts. Once I started taking painting and drawing, I fell in love with it. But with a strong interest in Mexican-American studies and history in itself, specifically Mexican history and Latin American history, which influences a lot of my work. Small hints of social political issues in my work. It wasn't until my last year that I started developing more, I guess, of a strong body of work. I ended up creating a mural size painting that was titled Redford, and it goes back to the shooting of Ezequiel Hernandez Jr., who was an 18-year-old high school student that got shot by a team of 4 U.S. Marines that were patrolling, or that were part of a, I guess, observation team along the border back in 1997. So he was actually my brother's high school classmate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he ended up accidentally shooting at a team of 4 U.S. Marines that no one knew were there. They were fully guillotined, and nobody could really see them. So
And they were across the U.S. border?
they were on the U.S. border, and this was in the town of Redford, which is a town nearby Presidio, a few miles off. And I think he had gotten out of school, and most of the town is composed of people that are in the agriculture business. So he came from this sort of background, and he had a herd of goats. He had taken his goats out to graze along the river, and I guess he saw something in the bushes and shot in that direction. And the team of U.S. Marines responded by kind of pursuing him without him knowing, and accidentally, quote unquote, shooting him in self-defense, according to their account.
So 4 Marines versus 1 farmer, huh?
And with a .22 old rifle. And they had, of course, long-distance rifles. And so that kind of sparked something in the type of work that I started doing into Latin American history, specifically with issues dealing with social political issues along the border, very regional type of work. Because I am originally from the state of Chihuahua, my work started focusing on human rights abuses, such as forced disappearances, kidnappings for ransom, the murdering of women, which is referred to as femicides in the city of Juarez, indigenous rights, specifically the Raramuri people in the state of Chihuahua up in Copper Canyon. And it's that type of work that, or it's that type of investigation that led me to look into these same types of issues along a lot of countries in Latin America: Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Peru, Nicaragua, and within the last year of my Masters of Fine Arts program, me and another artist from Mexico, he also teaches at UTSA. We started, this was during the time of the, I guess, high influx of Central American kids that were coming in during that summer. And we started to work with these kids at a housing complex, I guess, and giving out, or just doing little activities with them, bringing art to that community, and just kind of giving them a way to express themselves, but at the same time, I don't know. It was just a good experience for us as to like getting to know the kids, and kind of not really asking them about what they had gone through, but just seeing, like visually what they had gone through, and their hopes and dreams. We would do a lot of activities with collage and drawing and painting. We volunteered for almost a year, and we would try to go every 2 weeks. Obviously, both of us were sort of busy, and we did as much as we could. And within that last year, they kind of sparked this painting, which is the idea for that painting, which is sort of, I guess, which is kind of honoring those people that have made that long journey, risking their lives to reach that safe haven. And again, sort of dealing with these issues along the border. At the time, there was a lot of violence on the border. I guess some of my family, I had a family member who was kidnapped for ransom. So that highly influenced my work. Now, I grew up on the border. I saw a lot of these issues at a very young age. Whether it was drug trafficking and extortioning. I was exposed to that at a very young age, and I just kind of always had that question. I was like, why does this happen?
What's your take, as much as you want to, I guess, divulge your opinion on the issue, but what is your take on previous administrations and this current administrations on their implementation of executive orders and immigration law?
Well, since I've been living in the States, it seems like, because of 9/11, I think things changed quite a bit. For example, near the area where I lived, there was the official port of entry in the Ojinaga-Presidio border. That's, I guess, the next major entry point going south of El Paso. But there was also non-official crossings, specifically in Redford. They would have a man that, you would pay a peso or two, and he would cross you. He would get you on his little boat and bring you across the border. So it was somewhat more open. It was a port of entry that had been crossed for thousands and thousands of years, way before there was even a border. Like I told you, my grandmother was born in the United States, and my great-grandfather was born in the U.S. in a town that is not even along the U.S. border anymore. It disappeared. It was more like a ranch, really, more than anything. And then once George Bush Jr. got in, he started using the military again, maybe not armed this time, but again, using them to sort of be it's like a patrol more than anything. And and I don't really see it change. I see it as the same thing, you know. When Obama came in, there was probably he had one of the largest deportation rates than any other president. And now that President Trump is in office, he wants to build the wall. I mean, I see it as a waste of money, really. But it's to me, it's the same thing. You know, it's just a different face. But in my work, I try to talk about that. I try to talk about the hypocrisy within the administrations and the way that they do business with other countries. You know, when they talk about free trade agreements, it's hard for me to believe that they don't think about the consequences of what these agreements bring. I mean, since NAFTA was signed, there was a large influx of farmers from the South that got left without work or were unable to compete with American agricultural businesses and were therefore put out of business. So what happens? They have to flow north to where American companies are building maquiladoras. Unfortunately, these border cities were not capable of providing very basic needs. The infrastructure wasn't there, which then creates high levels of poverty, high levels of crime, and people are forced to then continue their migration north. What I don't understand, or what I'm trying to understand, is that why is it that goods and money are able to cross borders so easily, but workers aren't unable to do that? To me, that's sort of a way of controlling their means of exploitation. To me, it's normal that these people would want to, of course, be able to provide for their families back home if they can come here to this country and they start to figure out that they can be homeowners. The police here are somewhat more of straight arrows. They're not as corrupt, let's call them that, or they're not as bad. And why wouldn't they want to come here if they're able to do that? People complain. It's like, oh, you know, they're taking our jobs, but it's like, or this is our country. But our country doesn't belong to you. It's like you make your country. You know, it's like you come here, you work, you buy a house, you become part of the community, you pay your taxes. Well, then that makes you part of the country and a very responsible resident in the country. If anything, I feel like it's the people taking it up on themselves to provide or to establish a economic support system for the lower classes in other countries. By sending money back, they're doing what the governments of certain Latin American countries, including Mexico, are unable to do. The thing is that governments in Latin American countries, specifically Mexico, they limit, or let's say that they only provide, they provide 3 exhaust pipes for people of a lower social class to be able to get out of the economic status, socioeconomic status that they're in. One, and probably one of the saddest and costliest way is through immigration. I mean, that causes a great burden on these families. You know, they become separated. Kids become separated from their families. They grow up without parents, but yet they're able to be provided the basic necessities to live back home. The other one is organized crime, which is probably one of the fastest ways to make money, but again, the deadliest. And the third one and the third one would be the black market, you know, an economic system that works underground. When you have people making such a small amount of money per day to survive, and when the government raises taxes on gasoline, on tortillas, on corn, on bread, it's like where are they able to find a way to make more, you know, in order to continue supporting the lifestyle and a very minimal lifestyle that they have. They get pushed. It's almost like they're forcing the lower social class to commit these crimes, to incarcerate themselves. Let's call them that. It's like you leave them no option but to break the law. Most of the people here, because illegally or undocumented, though they're quote unquote breaking the law, they're law-abiding citizens. I mean, they wouldn't want to bring attention to themselves. They're here to chase that quote unquote American dream. I mean, most of them are capitalists. You know, most of them set up businesses. They're not here to break the law. I mean, if they wanted to break the law and do whatever it is that they please, they could do that easily in Mexico. So it's a bogus argument to say that the people migrating here are the worst of the worst. Again, these are people that are trying to escape the worst of the worst. It's a very basic survival mechanism. If you're in an area of conflict, why would you want to stick around there? If you can't find a job, or there's very little job opportunity, if crime is high, and your only way to make money in order to supply your family with the basic needs, again, it goes back to those three routes that they are being forced into. And it only makes sense to go to another country where you're able to make more money per hour than in your homelands, and in which you're able to set up a legitimate business and pay taxes and not be harassed or extortioned by organized crime that the government does not seem to be able to control.
Or what have been your experiences?
Well, I mean, growing up on the border, you know, it's always, again, I have family on both sides, so crossing that bridge was a daily ritual. Because of my appearance, it's easy for them to, I guess, associate me with organized crime. And it's always a hassle. It's almost always a hassle every time I cross the border. Sir, can you pull into secondary inspection? Which I do, and then after secondary inspection, they take me out of the vehicle and they tell me to go to their offices, and they hold me there and they question me there, and it's always the same thing over and over again. I guess my physical appearance brings a lot of attention. I guess I fit a certain stereotype, and therefore I get questioned almost every single time. The border is an interesting place, and it wasn't until I moved out that I started thinking about how much of a police state it is. You know, so many miles from the border, you have an inspection station from the Border Patrol. You have cameras pointing at you, who goes in, who goes out, and it's constant watching. You have blimp that is constantly watching the skies, looking, and radars looking for low-flying airplanes. So we always sort of had encounters with Homeland Security. As kids, being bored in town, you know, sometimes we just like to get a rise out of them, I guess. High schoolers, you know, whatever, and go ride the river road on the truck as fast as you can, and yeah, you know, it's like have them chase us, and just, you know, for kicks or whatever. And you don't know exactly why you do it, but there's some sort of, I guess, resistance there. The way that, you know, like I told you the story of Ezequiel, you know, for whatever reason, the information that was given to that group of U.S. Marines was that 70 to 75% of the town of Redford, a town of 100 people, was involved in drug trafficking. Oh, wow. Which is a ridiculous statement. But to find out information like that, and to know that the government looks at your hometown as nothing but criminals, already in itself lets you know of how they look at you, just because of where you live. It already incriminating you. So it's hard not to have, I guess, ill feelings towards the government and their views on immigration.
All right. This might be just more of an open question, but it's just like, is with the current state of America, and I guess the very polarizing issues that are going on, I mean, is this the America that I guess you were sold on, or you kind of envisioned when you heard about America?
To answer your question, America was founded by people who were immigrants to begin with, okay? Therefore, as we're still a nation of immigrants, allowing people to come into this country from wherever they so choose to, provided they're a contributing member to society, is nothing that should be restricted.
But I believe strongly that if we are going to bring immigrants into this country, that 40 hours of English education, that is the mandatory amount, and then they must go to work and start paying for their own keep, that is absolutely ridiculous, that we don't expect our citizens, babies, to learn English in that amount of time. So I really strongly believe that we need to extend that to more hours. Many of them, it takes sometimes 2 years, like 4 semesters before they can speak English well enough to become productive in the workforce. And I think we're shortchanging them and us by not allowing them more time to do it. And many of them are required to go to work, and therefore they cannot continue their education.
So here's the main thing, or my main concern. I think we do have enough and actually ample resources to assist. My concern is to invest in the right resource to integrate refugees. For example, it is not enough to have the good intention and the availability of the resources. It's about having the knowledge and the training to utilize these resources. Again, this country is one of the, if it's not the only or the first hospitable country when it comes to refugees and immigration, but I think we have enough resources. But as I mentioned earlier, it's about the knowledge available to utilize these resources by raising the awareness level for our volunteers citizens, staff members working for the resettlement agencies and other nonprofit organizations. And then once we've done that, we need to move to the actual implementations of how do we approach refugees themselves to include them. The first thing we need to do is, and very important, is to give them a voice. Unfortunately, sometimes you see people, or especially those who work with the nonprofit organizations or maybe even with the government agencies, they would like to help based on their knowledge and experience. However, there is an easier approach, which is asking the refugee themselves about what do they need, what do they think, and how can we help them to integrate. Now, we might have different opinions. We might have something that we cannot really utilize or implement. However, that will be a great opportunity for us to negotiate and discuss and educate each other, about both cultures. So open dialogue is one good approach for that. By listening and giving voice to the people we are trying to help. And the second is the knowledge and the training should be available for those who would like to be involved as advocates or maybe as volunteers or even employees of the nonprofit or profit organizations. And last but not least is about empowering. Is you have integration is not, in my opinion at least, it's not a process of giving people to get by. It's about empowerment. It's about regain that sense of national identity. Remember, they came with no connection, with a broken spirit, a broken financial situation, and also the trauma. So we have to help them gain the trust among themselves and gain the trust between the citizens or the community members and the refugee themselves. And then we have to empower them so they can be an active citizens in the future. And in this case, we are not only helping refugees, but also helping ourselves as a citizen of this society by investing in new resources, and we might utilize these resources in the future. So that's what we call acculturation and integration, because we will be different members of the society. However, we will contribute to the same shared goal, which is building and improving our society.
This is a very polarizing issue in our society, and we're seeing it more and more as the president is displaying his agenda. And so it's really important that people understand the law, that they understand their rights, and that they become vocal with what they believe in, but to become vocal with your legislators and your senators, and to let them know how you feel about the particular issue. If something positive has happened, let them know that it's positive, that they're not afraid, that they don't fear, or that they understand that immigrants have become very helpful and useful in our society or in our economy. So I think that's probably the best way right now, that an individual out there who has an opinion can help towards the reform that we're looking for.
I think like one of the most basic things that we need to do as Americans is to talk about these issues. And through dialogue, try to inform each other and to bring different perspectives into each other and be heard. I think because of certain ideologies that are held, people tend to shut down and do not want to hear, certain things. But sometimes it's good to hear things that you don't want to hear. and they might be for a good reason. I think that is something that that needs to be done, is to, come in contact with an immigrant, talk to them, hear their stories. And if after you hear their stories you are not, you still hold your same views, then, so be it. But, try to ask questions and ask them. I mean, that's your main source right there. Forget about what a government figure is telling you. Go talk to the people that made that journey, and you tell me if you still feel that they don't belong here.
And I think the reason why people are so standoffish, because they don't understand. And when you don't understand something, then you're afraid of it. But if they would just take the time to just communicate. And one of my students said something that made me cry. Remember when the immigration policy came out? He said to me, Americans really care about us. He said, I was so surprised to see all those people come out and stand against what was wrong. I said, yes, that's how we really feel. Because in America, we've learned so many lessons about that. So getting involved, communicating, and helping us stand up by any means necessary about how we can make this a focus where all people can come here and live in the United States. That's all they want. That's all our parents wanted.